There was no build-up, no long, drawn-out moments of reflection or build-up of anger. It was a single, quiet moment that changed everything. I don't know what made me do it. I wasn't angry or frustrated or overwhelmed by emotion. In fact, I think I was mostly numb. It was just the sudden realization that had been creeping up on me for weeks, months even, that made everything else feel so painfully clear. It was just another Wednesday evening, after work. The same routine, Melinda and I sitting on opposite ends of the couch, me half watching the TV while she scrolled through her phone. The silence in the room was so thick you could feel it in your bones. The air was still, but it felt like it was pressing in on me, suffocating me slowly. I could hear the clock ticking. Tick, tick, tick. The seconds passing, each one more agonizing than the last. We were so far apart, but it wasn't just physical distance. It was something much deeper. Something I hadn't wanted to face. I looked at her, and she looked at the phone. Her fingers moved across the screen in a mechanical motion, completely unaware of me. I didn't know what was more painful, the fact that she didn't notice my gaze or the fact that it felt like I wasn't even there. I had tried. God, I had tried everything to break through, to revive what we once had, but nothing seemed to matter anymore. I had been running on empty for so long, just going through the motions, trying to make things work. I had convinced myself that I could deal with it. But tonight, in that silence, something inside me broke. I stood up from the couch, my legs feeling heavy, like they were made of lead. My heart raced, but my mind was strangely calm. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water. The sound of the glass clinking against the counter was louder than it should have been in the quiet house. I stared at the water for a moment, feeling the weight of everything I had been suppressing. I needed to say something. I needed to make her see that this, whatever this was, wasn't enough anymore. I walked back into the living room, took a deep breath, and stood in front of her. Her eyes flickered up from the phone for a split second, but quickly returned to it. That small moment, that tiny acknowledgement, felt like a punch to my gut. She didn't even look at me long enough to see how much I was hurting. I exhaled and tried to steady myself. My voice felt foreign when I finally spoke. I can't remember the last time we were close, I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. She didn't flinch. She didn't even seem to care. She just continued scrolling through her phone, as if I hadn't just said the most important thing that had been eating away at me for months. My stomach twisted into a knot. Was this it? Was I invisible to her now? She finally spoke, her voice flat and unfeeling. If you want affection, get a dog. Her words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just the lack of warmth in her voice. It was the utter disregard for everything we had been through. It was as if she had completely written me off, like I was nothing more than a nuisance in her life. I stood there for a moment, processing what she had said. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. How had we gotten here? Where had the love gone? And why did she sound so indifferent? I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. My mind raced, but I couldn't find the words. I had been patient for so long, hoping things would change, but now it felt like I was clinging to something that no longer existed. The woman I married was gone. The warmth, the intimacy, the affection, I had been holding on to a memory. Without another word, I turned and walked away. The door to the bedroom creaked as I opened it, and I closed it softly behind me. I didn't want to wake her. I didn't want to explain anything. But as I sat down on the edge of the bed, the reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a rough patch. This wasn't something we could fix with a little talk or a weekend getaway. This was the end of something that had died a long time ago. I pulled open the drawer beside the bed and took out the envelope. I had been preparing this for days, but I hadn't had the courage to take the final step. The divorce papers. The realization that I had been living in a lie, hoping for something that would never come back, hit me hard. I laid the papers on the kitchen table, where she would find them in the morning. No note. No explanation. I had nothing left to say. I didn't need to tell her why I was leaving. Her words had already told me everything I needed to know. In the morning, I was gone. I woke up the next morning, the sharp rays of sunlight cutting through the blinds and casting strange shadows on the walls. For a moment, I thought I had imagined everything. The silence, the words, the decision. But as I looked over at the empty side of the bed, I knew it was real. It wasn't a dream. Melinda hadn't been beside me, not that she had been for months. The space she left in the bed felt colder, emptier. I got up slowly, Not because I was tired, but because I felt numb. Everything seemed surreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. There was no rush. There was no panic. There was just a strange sense of calm. I made my way to the kitchen, my steps echoing in the silence. The house seemed to breathe in rhythm with me, slow, deliberate. I reached the kitchen counter, and there they were, the divorce papers I had left there the night before. They lay untouched, a stark reminder of everything I had just thrown away. Or maybe I hadn't thrown anything away at all. Maybe it had already been gone long before I put the papers down. I didn't know. But in that moment, I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. I stared at them for a while, wondering if I was making the right choice. Was this it? Was there any chance that Melinda would realize what she was about to lose? Would she come to her senses? But as quickly as the thought entered my mind, I dismissed it. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. I had lived in her shadow for too long, putting my needs and my feelings aside, waiting for a change that wasn't coming. I had nothing left to give her. And honestly, I didn't know if I had anything left to give anyone. Just as I was about to make a decision on what to do next, I heard the faint sound of footsteps. Melinda. She was awake. I wasn't ready for this. Her presence, her indifference, the same silence that had been building between us for months. But I knew it was time. There was no turning back. She walked into the kitchen, her hair disheveled from sleep, but her expression was as blank as ever. It was like we had both been living in two different worlds under the same roof, completely unaware of how far apart we had drifted. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me as if she was waiting for something, waiting for me to say something. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. All I could do was look at her and realize that the person standing in front of me was no longer the woman I once knew. The woman I had married, the one I had loved, had become a stranger to me. And I had become a stranger to her, too. She broke the silence, as usual, with something dismissive. "Are you just going to stand there all day?" she asked, her voice flat, like she couldn't care less if I answered or not. I wanted to say something, anything. I wanted to shout, to cry, to make her understand what was going through my mind. But instead, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I simply walked away. No words. No fight. I turned and left the kitchen, heading for the front door. "Where are you going?" she called out after me, but I didn't answer. I just kept walking. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. I didn't need to make her understand why I was leaving, why I had decided that enough was enough. The truth was, there was no one left to convince. She had already made up her mind about me, just like I had made up mine about her. As I reached the door, I felt an odd sense of finality. My hand gripped the doorknob, and I turned it slowly. The weight of it, the heaviness of the moment, hung in the air. I opened the door and stepped out, leaving behind everything I had once known. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound that felt louder than it should have been. It was like I was closing the door not just on our marriage, but on everything that had come before it. All the years, all the memories, all the promises we had made to each other. Gone. Vanished in an instant. As I walked down the driveway, the morning sun on my face felt different, colder, sharper. I could hear the sound of birds in the trees, the distant hum of traffic, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Like I had been holding my breath for so long, and now it was finally okay to exhale. But even as I walked away, I couldn't shake the thought that kept creeping into my mind. Was this really the right thing to do? Was I making a mistake? I didn't know, but I also didn't care anymore. The world outside seemed impossibly calm as I stood at the foot of the driveway, the air cool and crisp against my skin. It was almost like the universe was indifferent to the wreckage I was walking away from, a wreckage that had been years in the making. I took a deep breath and let the fresh air fill my lungs, trying to push the thoughts that had been consuming me out of my mind. I had made the decision. I had left. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep pretending. The drive was almost mechanical. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and my mind wandered. I had been to this point before, in smaller ways, in quieter moments, when I felt the cracks between Melinda and me widening. The quiet dinners, the evenings spent together but apart, the conversations that had become more about logistics than connection. But it was never this clear, never this final. I was leaving everything behind, the life I had built with her, the hopes I had that one day we'd get back to where we once were. But now, in the cool light of the morning, those thoughts seemed like distant fantasies. It was over. It had been over long before I had even walked out the door. The first few hours after I left were a blur. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I needed space, time to think, time to breathe without the constant weight of disappointment hanging over me. I ended up at a small cafe, one of those places where you could just get lost in the crowd. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the world move on without me. It's funny, but in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see for a long time. I was living my life for someone else. I had been living my life to keep Melinda happy, to keep our marriage intact, to make sure everything appeared perfect on the outside. I had sacrificed pieces of myself, one by one, just to hold on to something that was slipping through my fingers. I had tried to make her see how badly I wanted to fix things, to fix us. But nothing had worked. No matter how many times I had tried to communicate, no matter how many romantic gestures I'd made, I had been met with the same indifference, the same coldness. She didn't want to try, and I had been too afraid to face the truth. She had checked out long ago. As I sat there, the weight of everything hit me all at once. The life I thought I had was a lie. The woman I had married, the one I had devoted myself to, was no longer the person I was fighting for. I was fighting for a ghost. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, walking aimlessly around the city, letting my thoughts run wild. I didn't even want to call anyone, my friends, my family, because I didn't know what to say. How could I explain this? How could I explain the decision I had made when I didn't even understand it myself? But even as the uncertainty gnawed at me, there was a sense of clarity, something I had been craving for a long time. That night, as I lay in a hotel room, the events of the day played in my mind like a broken record. I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to the house, to the life that had felt so suffocating. There was no apology, no grand moment of realization from Melinda that would fix things. It was done. It wasn't easy. I wasn't numb to what I had lost. I wasn't indifferent to the years I had spent with her, the memories we had created. But in that hotel room, in the quiet of my own thoughts, I realized something. I had spent so many years trying to make her happy, trying to meet her expectations, that I had completely forgotten to ask myself what I needed, what I wanted. I had built a life with her, but I had never really built a life for myself. I spent that night going over every decision, every moment that led me to this point. And in the morning, as I got dressed and checked out of the hotel, I knew what I had to do next. There was no more running. There was no more pretending. I was done with the facade, done with the silent treatment, the half-hearted attempts to fix something that was already broken. I had to face the reality. I had been living in a lie. The next morning, I walked into the apartment I had rented, the one that smelled like new carpet and fresh paint. It felt strange, like it wasn't really mine. But at the same time, it was the first real step toward freedom. I spent the day packing a few things, the basics, clothes, some books, things that mattered to me. I didn't pack a lot. I didn't need to. The more I packed, the more I realized how little I actually had to show for my time with Melinda. How many things had I accumulated over the years, only to find out that they didn't matter? I stared at the empty room, the silence almost deafening. This was it. There was no going back. The phone rang. It was her. "Where are you?" she asked, her voice clipped and cold. "I'm gone," I said, my voice steady, but something deep inside felt hollow. I wasn't sure if it was regret or relief. "I'm done, Melinda." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, but no words came. And for the first time in a long time, I realized she didn't have anything left to say either. I hung up. That was the last time I spoke to her. The following days were a blur. I was living in a fog, but it wasn't the kind of fog that makes everything seem distant. No, this was a thick, suffocating fog that wrapped itself around me, dragging me deeper into a new, unfamiliar world. I wasn't sure if I had done the right thing, but I knew I couldn't go back. There was no going back to the life I had left behind. It felt like stepping into a void, an unknown space where everything was possible, yet nothing was certain. I spent my time at the small apartment I had rented, trying to create a routine. I needed something to hold on to, some semblance of normality. I'd wake up early, make coffee, sit by the window, and watch the world move on without me. People went about their daily lives, unaware of the life-altering decisions I had just made. I spent hours walking through the city, my thoughts scattered. There were times when I felt a strange sense of freedom, like I could breathe for the first time in years. But there were also moments when the weight of what I had left behind crashed down on me. Melinda, the life we built, the memories, it all seemed so distant, like it belonged to someone else. I felt a strange combination of loss and liberation, as if the very act of leaving had shattered something I had been holding onto for far too long. The loneliness was something I hadn't anticipated. I didn't miss Melinda, not in the way I had expected. But the absence of her presence, the absence of a shared life, left a hollow space that I couldn't fill. I didn't miss the constant arguments or the icy silences, but I missed the illusion of connection, the routine of knowing there was someone there, even if we weren't really there. I had spent so many years pretending that everything was okay, that I never realized how much I had been hiding from myself. But in the quiet of the apartment, I had to confront the truth. I had spent so much of my life chasing her approval, trying to make her happy, trying to fix something that was never really broken, until it was. The problem wasn't her. It was me. I had allowed myself to lose sight of who I was in the process of trying to keep her happy. And now, I was paying the price. It wasn't easy. Some nights, I found myself awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I couldn't help but think about the good times, the laughter, the affection, the intimacy. Those moments hadn't been a lie. But somewhere along the way, we had both stopped trying. I had stopped trying. And now, I was the one left to pick up the pieces. I spent my days working, trying to fill the silence with the hum of normal life. But it was impossible to ignore the nagging feeling that something was missing. I had gone from being her husband to being nothing more than a man trying to find his way in the world. And while I was free, I couldn't escape the guilt that clung to me like a shadow. I had walked away from the woman I had spent years with, and no matter how much I tried to tell myself it was the right decision, there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. A few days after I left, I found myself standing in front of the cafe we used to visit. Melinda and I had shared so many mornings there, sipping coffee and talking about everything and nothing. I stood there for a long time, staring through the window at the familiar scene inside. The barista behind the counter, the couple sitting at their tables, the sound of quiet chatter. It all felt so normal, so out of reach. I walked in, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach, the strange feeling of being disconnected from everything I used to know. I ordered a coffee and sat in the corner, my hands trembling slightly as I waited for the barista to hand me my drink. When the cup was placed in front of me, I took a sip and tried to focus on something, anything, to keep my mind from drifting back to her. But it wasn't that easy. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of the life I had left behind. The conversations, the inside jokes, the quiet mornings spent together, all of it felt like a distant dream. It wasn't just the place that brought back memories. It was the realization that I had abandoned something I had once believed in. I had convinced myself that leaving was the only way forward, that staying in a relationship that no longer made sense would only destroy me. But now, with every step I took away from her, I felt like I was unraveling. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done something irreversible. I wasn't sure if I was running towards something better or away from something that had simply become too painful to bear. I had given so much of myself to her, and now I was left with nothing but the pieces of a life I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. As the days passed, I began to realize that leaving was just the beginning. The hardest part was yet to come. It wasn't about moving on. It was about rediscovering who I was without her, without the relationship that had defined so much of my life. It wasn't just the loss of her, it was the loss of myself. And as much as I hated to admit it, I had no idea how to navigate this new life I had created for myself. But I also knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back. There was no turning back from what I had done. I had chosen this path, and now I had to see where it would lead. The days seemed to blend into one another, indistinguishable from each other in their monotony. I woke up each morning in the same empty apartment, the sterile walls reflecting the silence that had taken over my life. There was no one to share a cup of coffee with, no one to talk to at the end of the day. The loneliness crept in slowly, at first a subtle presence, but soon it became a constant companion. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive. It reminded me of what I had left behind and what I was trying to escape from. But there were moments, brief flashes, when I would catch myself thinking about Melinda, about the life we had, the years we spent together. I tried to avoid these thoughts, but they had a way of finding me, creeping into my mind when I least expected it. It wasn't that I missed her. It was more that I missed the person I thought she was. The woman I had believed in. The woman I had fought for. The woman who had once looked at me with so much hope and affection. Now, it felt like she was just a shadow of herself, a distant memory that had somehow slipped through my fingers. I still couldn't shake the feeling that I had done something irreversible. I had left her, yes. But in doing so, had I left a part of myself behind as well? There were mornings when I would sit at the small table in my apartment, staring out the window, wondering if I was doing the right thing. It was easy to say I had made the decision for my own well-being, for my own peace of mind, but deep down, I couldn't deny that there was a part of me that was still searching for something. For closure. For answers. I hadn't heard from Melinda since I left. I knew I shouldn't expect a call or a message. She had made her feelings clear enough the last time we spoke. But it was strange, this silence between us. I wasn't sure if it was a relief or a reminder of how disconnected we had become. There was a time when we couldn't go a day without talking to each other, without sharing our thoughts, our fears, our dreams. But now, it was like we were strangers living in the same space, too afraid to confront the truth that was right in front of us. One evening, as I sat in the dim light of the apartment, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart skipped a beat, unsure of what to expect. Maybe it was a neighbor, or maybe it was someone from my past, checking in, asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. I opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking as I pulled it back to reveal Melinda. For a moment, neither of us said anything. There was an awkward tension hanging in the air, like we were both waiting for the other to make the first move. She looked different. Her eyes were tired, like she hadn't been sleeping, and her clothes were rumpled, as if she had been carrying the weight of something heavy. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice quieter than I remembered. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't ready to talk to her, not yet. The last time we had spoken, it had been a clean break, or so I thought. I had left. I had made the decision to move on, to start over. But standing in front of me, Melinda seemed to have changed. Her presence, the way she held herself, made it clear that she was no longer the woman I had walked away from. I hesitated, stepping aside to let her in. She walked past me, her footsteps heavy in the silence of the apartment. I could feel the air between us thickening, each moment stretching out longer than it should have. I sat down on the couch, not knowing where to begin. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But the anger was still there, just beneath the surface, waiting to bubble up when the time was right. "I don't know why I'm here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I couldn't let you walk away and not say something." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure I could. The words felt stuck in my throat. She took a deep breath and continued. "I don't know when we lost each other. I don't know when I stopped trying, when you stopped trying. But I've been thinking about it, about us, and I don't want to let it go like this." I stared at her, trying to process her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, to let myself feel the hope that she was offering. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt for so long, told me not to fall for it. "We can't go back, Melinda," I finally said, the words coming out more harshly than I intended. "We can't undo everything that's happened." She flinched at the tone in my voice, but she didn't back down. "I know," she whispered, "but I'm asking for a chance. Not to fix everything, not to erase what's been broken, but to try again. To at least try." There it was, the plea I had been waiting for. It wasn't just the apology I had hoped for. It was something deeper. She wasn't asking me to forgive her. She wasn't asking me to forget. She was asking me to take a risk, to open myself up again, to trust that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way back to each other. I sat there, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I knew I couldn't just jump into something like that, not without thinking it through. But what did I have left to lose? Hadn't I already lost everything by walking away? "I don't know if I can," I said quietly. "I don't know if I can trust you again. And I don't know if I can trust myself." The words stung as they left my mouth, but they were the truth. Melinda looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I needed to come here to tell you that I'm not done trying. If you're not, either." The silence that followed was deafening. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't the only one lost. We had both been adrift in the same sea, too proud to admit that we were sinking together. But could I risk it? Could I take that first step towards something that might just end in heartbreak again? Or was it already too late? I stayed silent, my thoughts tumbling over each other, like a disjointed puzzle that didn't fit together. There was a time when hearing Melinda speak like that would have made my heart leap, a time when I would have been ready to run back into her arms, to forgive her and myself for all the mistakes. But now, everything felt different. Her words, her plea, they didn't fill the space between us like they once would have. Instead, they hovered, fragile and uncertain, in the air. I wasn't sure what I was afraid of, her rejection or my own inability to trust again. The problem wasn't Melinda, not entirely. The problem was me. I had spent so much time second-guessing myself, worrying about how she would react, how I was supposed to be the perfect husband, the perfect partner. But now, there was no perfection left to hold on to. There was only raw emotion, truth, and fear. Fear of being vulnerable again. Fear of opening myself up to someone who had already let me down. Melinda shifted uncomfortably on the couch, her eyes flickering nervously over my face as she waited for me to respond. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the same desperation that had once driven me to do everything I could to fix our relationship. She was still the woman I had loved, but now, there was something different. Something that I couldn't quite grasp, something that felt like it had been torn away. "I don't know what you want from me, Melinda," I said, my voice low, almost strained. "You think that just because you came here, just because you're asking for another chance, that everything will go back to how it was? You don't get it, do you? I can't go back to that." Her face twisted in pain, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. Instead, she looked at me with a kind of quiet resolve, something I hadn't seen in her before. "I know we can't go back," she said softly, her voice steady. "But I think we can move forward. I think we can rebuild." I wanted to argue, to tell her how impossible that sounded. But I couldn't. There was something in her voice, in the way she spoke, that made me hesitate. She wasn't asking me to forget everything or to pretend that nothing had happened. She was simply asking me to consider the possibility of moving forward. I stood up, pacing the small space of the apartment. My mind raced, the familiar feelings of uncertainty flooding back. Could we really rebuild? Could I really look at her the same way again after everything that had happened? It wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about trust, and once that trust was broken, it didn't just repair itself overnight. But there was a part of me that wanted to believe her. A part of me that wanted to say, "Yes, let's try again. Let's put all the pain behind us and start fresh." That part of me, the part that had loved her more than anything, that had believed in us, whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance. But was I being foolish? Was I fooling myself into thinking that we could turn back time, that we could erase the wounds we had inflicted on each other? I wanted to believe in love, in second chances, but I had seen the consequences of that belief too many times. I had seen how easy it was for us to slip into old patterns, to fall into the same traps, to end up exactly where we were before, lost. "I don't know if I can," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust you again, and I don't know if I can trust myself to make the right choice." Her eyes softened, and she took a step closer to me. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right away," she said, her voice filled with quiet sincerity. "I'm not asking you to forget. I just need you to let me try, to give me a chance to prove that I can be better, that we can be better." The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself wavering. I wanted to say no, to close the door on everything we had once been. But I couldn't. I couldn't make that final decision, not yet. "I can't promise you anything," I said, my voice shaking with uncertainty. "I can't promise that I'll change or that I'll fall back in love with you. But I'll give you a chance. That's all I can do right now." She nodded, the relief in her eyes almost palpable. "That's all I ask." The silence that followed was thick with emotion, a silent agreement between us, an unspoken understanding that this was not going to be easy, that nothing was going to magically fix itself. But we had opened a door, a crack in the wall that had separated us for so long. And maybe that was enough. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty and hope. I didn't know what to expect, didn't know where this would lead. We spent time together, slowly rebuilding the foundation of our relationship. It wasn't like before. It couldn't be. But there was something new, something raw and vulnerable, that had started to grow between us. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, moments when I wanted to pull away, to run from the fear of repeating the same mistakes. But there were also moments when I felt a spark of connection, a glimmer of what we could have again, if we were willing to fight for it. The more time I spent with Melinda, the more I realized something. This wasn't just about her. It was about me, too. I had to confront my own demons, my own fears, my own brokenness. If I was going to let her back into my life, I had to be willing to let go of the past, to forgive both her and myself. And so I did. Slowly, cautiously, but with an open heart. Maybe there wasn't a perfect ending to this story. Maybe there never would be. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally making the choice that was right for me. The choice to heal, to rebuild, and to move forward. One step at a time. I was beginning to wonder whether I had made a mistake. The more time I spent with Melinda, the more I realized just how deeply the cracks in our relationship had spread. At first, I thought that if we simply opened up to each other, if we just communicated better, we could erase the years of silence and neglect. But as the days passed, I started to see the truth behind her words, the truth behind mine. It wasn't just about falling back in love. It was about rebuilding something that had already been shattered. And there was no instruction manual for this. We were two strangers trying to reconnect, but the damage we had caused to each other, to ourselves, was too deep to just ignore. I woke up one morning to find her standing by the kitchen window, staring out at the street below. Her face was soft, almost melancholic, like she was lost in thought, lost in some distant memory. I stood there for a while, watching her, unsure whether to speak or to let her be. The silence between us had become a familiar friend. It wasn't the uncomfortable kind, the one that suffocates you with its weight, but the kind that fills the space, allowing both of us to breathe without demanding anything in return. "You know," she said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence, "I never realized how much I depended on you until you weren't there anymore." I didn't respond right away. Her words hung in the air, thick and heavy, like an unspoken confession. I could hear the remorse in her voice, but I didn't know how to react. How could I react? I had been trying to make sense of everything for so long, trying to forgive her, trying to forgive myself, that now, hearing her admit something so raw, something so honest, made me realize just how much we had both been living in denial. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Melinda," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. It wasn't that I didn't want to trust her. It was that I couldn't bring myself to. Every time I looked at her, I saw the woman who had pulled away from me, the woman who had stopped caring, the woman who had chosen silence over love. It wasn't easy to erase that image, to forget the way she had treated me when I was at my lowest. She didn't flinch. She didn't look at me with anger or disappointment. Instead, she sighed, a deep, painful sigh that seemed to carry all the weight of the past. "I know, and I don't blame you. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I need you to understand that I'm trying. I'm trying to fix the things I broke." I watched her for a long time, feeling the familiar tug in my chest. It was a mixture of longing and anger, of love and resentment. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that we could salvage something from the wreckage. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid that the walls I had built around myself were too high, too thick, for anyone to break through. Afraid that I had already given her everything I had, only to be left empty-handed. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered, my voice breaking with the weight of it all. "I don't know if I can let go of what happened. It's too much. The hurt, the betrayal. I can't just forget it." She took a step toward me, and for a moment, I thought she might reach out, might touch me, but she didn't. Instead, she stood there, looking at me with an intensity that almost burned. "I don't expect you to forget. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I need you to know that I'm not the same person I was. I'm trying, and I need you to see that." Her words cut through me, slicing away the walls I had so carefully constructed. I didn't want to feel this. I didn't want to let myself believe that there was still something left to save. But in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't the only one who had been broken. I had been broken too. I had been living in a shell of myself for so long, pretending that everything was fine, pretending that I didn't care. But deep down, I still loved her. And that scared me. The days that followed were a mix of conflicting emotions. There were moments when I felt like I was finally beginning to let her back in, like we could rebuild something beautiful from the ashes. But then there were moments when the past would crash into the present, and I would be reminded of everything we had lost. The walls I had built were starting to crumble, but every time I felt myself getting closer to her, a part of me would retreat, scared of getting hurt again. I realized something important during this time. Love wasn't just about the good moments. It wasn't just about the laughter or the passion or the intimacy. It was about the ugly moments, too. The pain, the mistakes, the apologies. Love was about letting someone in, even when they had the power to hurt you. And that was what I had to decide, whether or not I was ready to open myself up again, to let Melinda back in, to trust that we could make it work. But there was no easy answer. There was no clear path. The truth was, I wasn't sure what I wanted. A part of me wanted to let her go, to walk away and never look back. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman she used to be, wanted to give her a chance. As the days passed, I found myself standing at a crossroads. I could walk away, keep running from the pain, from the uncertainty. Or I could choose to stay, to rebuild, to take the risk that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But was I ready for that? Was I ready to face the ghosts of our past and the walls we had built around each other? I didn't know. But as I stood there, staring at the road ahead, I realized that the choice was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to make it. The choice was mine. That thought echoed through my mind, repeating itself over and over, louder than anything else in my life. For so long, I had let fear dictate my actions. I had let the past control me, let the hurt take root in a place I couldn't escape from. But standing there, in the quiet of the apartment, I realized something important. The future wasn't written in stone. It wasn't defined by the mistakes I had made or the mistakes Melinda had made. The future was still ours to shape. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in a long while. Melinda wasn't just the woman who had hurt me. She was also the woman who had shared my dreams, my life, my laughter. She was the person I had loved once, and maybe, just maybe, the person I could love again. But I couldn't do it with the walls I had built around my heart. I couldn't live in the shadows of the past anymore. I stepped closer to her, the air between us still thick with the remnants of our past. But this time, there was something different. There was a shift, a recognition that we had both changed, that we had both grown, and that perhaps the second chance we were seeking wasn't about erasing what had happened, but learning from it. I'm not perfect, I said, my voice steady but soft. And I'm not expecting you to be either. But I'm willing to try again. I'm willing to build something new with you, if you're ready to do the same. Her eyes filled with unshed tears, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. But instead, she smiled. A genuine, relieved smile. I'm ready, she whispered. I've always been ready. In that moment, it wasn't about what we had lost. It was about what we were ready to find. We weren't going to fix everything overnight, and I didn't expect it to be easy. There would be days of doubt, of fear, of wondering if we were doing the right thing. But there would also be days of growth, of rediscovery, of learning to love each other not just for who we were, but for who we had become. We had both made mistakes. We had both hurt each other in ways that couldn't be undone. But what mattered now was that we were standing together, choosing to face the future with open hearts. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer had the power to define us. We had the power to redefine what we wanted from each other, from ourselves, and from life. The days that followed weren't perfect. They never are. We had moments of tension, of frustration, of old patterns resurfacing. But with each challenge, we took a step forward, learning how to communicate, how to love, how to be there for each other in ways we had never done before. I learned to forgive, not just Melinda, but myself. I learned that the road to healing wasn't a straight line, but a winding path full of bumps and detours. And sometimes, that's okay. Sometimes, the journey is the destination. A few months later, we took a trip together. Just the two of us, away from everything. We spent the weekend in a small cabin by the lake, surrounded by the quiet beauty of nature. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was everything we needed. We talked, we laughed, we held each other close, and for the first time in a long time, we were just us again. That weekend, as we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that the love we were building wasn't a perfect love, but it was real. And in its own way, it was more beautiful than anything I had ever known. We still had a long way to go. But as we sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, I knew one thing for sure. We were no longer afraid of the future. Because together, we could face whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running away. I was home.